So yeah, good evening everyone. See the ninth question. Technology is an indispensable tool in disaster management. Explain the role of GIS in context to the above statement, giving recent examples from India. Yeah, try this question. Ninth one. Give the framework. Good, Suman. Good framework for the answer. Yeah, good. So basically, technology is an indispensable tool in disaster management. So what do you mean by this is, in the context of disaster management, what is the intervention of technology? Okay. It's a very evident fact over the last 2.5 decades that technology as a value addition to the disaster management and its role in the disaster management has been extremely significant. Just yesterday, we were discussing about how the super cyclones can now be identified, including the minute or second when they are trying to move away from the the coastline or into the sea. So that is the kind of technology intervention we have, and that has been definitely useful in fighting the risk which disaster poses. Hence you can start introducing how technology is indispensable and an important part of disaster management in the present day dynamics. Now, what is GIS? GIS is Geographic Information Systems. So what is basically GIS stands for? What is the use of GIS? GIS is, it is used in the mapping. The basic advantage of mapping GIS is mapping of locations and tagging them so that they can be identified. Okay, mapping of locations and then trying to locate them in the context of mapping. So what is the role of GIS? So how do you use GIS in the context of disaster management is the question. First thing is, you can map the disaster prone areas. So you can use GIS across the PMRR, that is the prevention, mitigation, recovery and the rehabilitation. So in all the stages, you can integrate it with GIS. And then what are the things you can say with regard to GIS for prevention? The first thing is the zonation mapping. We were discussing about the zone 2, 3, 4, 5 and high risk zone, low risk zone. So we were talking about the earthquake zones. How is it possible? With the GIS. The zonation mapping can be done and the risk profiling of each and every area and its impact with regard to the disasters can be easily monitored. That is the first advantage. And by using different satellite images, especially the remote sensing satellites, we can try to get the information regarding the dynamics of that particular place during the disaster. And then by understanding the changes in the weather through the remote sensing satellites or the weather satellites, we can assess the impact of disaster like cyclones on that particular area. And we can also know the macro level and the micro level impact on these particular areas through the GIS. So all these are important parts of the application of GIS in the disaster management. Okay, so that is the important part where the technology as an indispensable tool becomes part of the disaster management. Based on this, what are the mitigation strategies? Mitigation strategies are when we know that a particular place is prone to the disaster, we can make the people in that area aware about how their future growing potential would be and ensure that the growth of that area would be in a sustainable way. What would be the recovery? We can track the dynamic nature of the disaster with the help of GIS. Continuous inputs can be taken and the recovery and the way to handle those particular disasters can be planned by the civil administration or the district administration. And rehabilitation, we can move them to the better places. For example, if an area is impacted by flood, we can immediately assess which area will not be impacted in the nearby area and move people to that particular highland or the other place. So this is how throughout the process of disaster management, the technology in general, GIS in particular, can help a lot in trying to reduce the impact of disaster. Hence, you can say in the context of climate change, disasters are becoming more and more frequent, and the need of the hour is to have a proper intervention of technology in countering these disasters, and GIS is one of the tools in reducing the impact of the disasters. Clear?
Yes,
So who has written this question? Kedar. He is coming after many days. So Kedar, we'll see. Kedar, you can slightly come from the technology part and then talk about the GIS, where the integration of information is available. Technology is a important tool in preparing for disaster, and there are many tools within the technology to attack this particular issue. Among them, GIS is one of the prominent thing where the integration of information is possible. So that would be a much better way of coming to the demand of the question. Okay, and then role of GIS, use of different, yes, satellite images, good. Preparation of base map of different themes using satellite images, yes. Thematic maps, as I told, the hydrogeomorphological map, slope map, terrain map. So based on this, you can plan the mitigation of the risk also. So these points you try to segregate in the PMRR: prevention, mitigation, recovery, and rehabilitation. Response and rehabilitation. So that way you can actually integrate the GIS into 4 stages of disaster management, and then it will look much more clear that yes, this particular technology is not only useful in some part, but the holistic way of handling the disaster. Okay, good. Yes, zones for rehabilitation. So you could have, you have actually written the points pertaining to all the different phases of disaster management. If you could have segregated them, it would add much value addition. Your conclusion is slightly casual. Okay, you have to be it's like, you know, very colloquial conclusion. So try to make your conclusion in a much professional way and in the jargon of the disaster management.
yes, sir.
I hope you are understanding what I mean when I say jargon of disaster management. the things like, the vulnerability or the zonation mapping, such things should reflect in your conclusions and introductions so that the examiner will understand that, yes, you know what you are trying to say. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Fine. Look at the 10th question. With reference to the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority guidelines, discuss the measures to be adopted to mitigate the impact of recent incidents of cloudbursts. We all know it came in the context of this Uttarakhand. Okay, so how do you mitigate the impact of cloudburst? See the question, it is the mitigation, not the response or recovery, mitigation. So try to think and then give the answer. You give the framework. Yes, the structure is good, Sumant. So basically, in the second question, you will write about the impact. What is basically a cloudburst? You have to give the introduction by defining a cloudburst. It's a sudden downpour of significant amount of precipitation. Sudden downpour of significant amount of precipitation or rainfall is in a very small area, not across wide area, in a very small area is generally referred to as cloudburst. So when the cloudburst happens, there is a widespread destruction and devastation which may happen. And that will be much more so when that particular area is prone to these particular disasters, especially if that is in the mountainous area like Uttarakhand. Basically, if the NDMA, the National Disaster Management Authority, the guidelines are divided into the structural aspects of mitigating the impact and the non-structural aspects. Because when we look at the 2016 disaster of the Uttarakhand, mainly there are many structural issues. The continuous construction of dams, the occupation of the river beds, construction in the extremely ecologically fragile zones, construction on the hilly slopes. So all this was very much going on unchecked in these places. And when cloudburst happened, it became a very big issue. So Sumant, you can write cloudburst. Cloudburst, in geography, cloudburst is a geographical term. So better to stick to the standard definitions in geography. If someone is asking you what are plate tectonics, you write what is plate tectonics, and then, if you can reproduce the definition in the standard textbook, it's a very good thing, actually. Okay, so you may not exactly word by word reproduce, but you should make the meaning. So cloudburst definition may look niche, where you might think 9 out of 10 aspirants write it. Okay, it is not a bad thing. But then the challenge of the question lies in the structuring of the answer, right? Where many students fail. You just pick up the answers written by in our own group. The structures of each and every answers are different. So that is where you have to focus. And then basically these guidelines are further there in structural and non-structural measures. So coming back to the structural measures, what are the structural measures? The construction should be there, that all these rivers should have proper banks. The river should have proper banks. Okay, so that when there is a tendency of overflowing, these banks or bunds will stop them from overflowing. And there should not be too many dams which obstruct the natural flow of water. That was the exact issue in Uttarakhand. Too many dams which were trying to obstruct the natural flow of the water into the rivers. And hence there was flooding happening. Okay. And then wherever there is the certain capacity of the catchment area, if you can improve the catchment area, then more water can be stored. So these are the structural issues. Then what are the non-structural measures which have to be taken? Non-structural issues is the zonation and the mapping. Non-structural issues are the zonation and mapping, which can happen and which can reduce the vulnerability, because now we know that this particular area is prone to the disaster. And having proper early warning systems in place so that people are having sufficient time to go and move towards the areas which are not impacted by these disasters. And then watershed management practices. Watershed management practices which can help in trying to channelize the water from one area to other, instead of, like creation of check dams or expansion of basins and so on. All these are important parts of the non-structural measures. So you can write about this and write about few government initiatives also. You know how the implementation of early warning system is now in place, and then how people are now clear about the encroachment not being the solution for development. All these are the awareness generation which the government has done post the Uttarakhand disaster. And then you can conclude by saying, due to the vagaries of climate change, cloudbursts are going to be a recurring phenomena. The need of the hour is to have proper systems in place and take structural and non-structural measures so that the impact of the cloudburst is mitigated to the great extent, and the loss of human life and the property is reduced to the great extent. And then on that you can conclude this particular answer. Who has written this answer? Whose answer was not evaluated yesterday or day before and who have written this? Anyone? Raghu. Arvind and Raghu, I'll do yours again. Ranjani, your introduction is good, but the answer is not complete, ma. Okay, you have to write in a much detailed way about the structural, non-structural measures as we discussed, and if there are any government initiatives, you can them and then conclude. You have just given pointers like points. The answer is not complete. Okay. Good introduction. Yes, Raghu, you have categorized into structural and non-structural measures. You have written what are structural measures, what are non-structural measures. Yes, good. Government initiatives, good. So it's a complete answer. Okay. And then conclusion, good. I think this is the model answer. If someone is trying to see the model answer, the Raghu's answer for the particular 10th question is very good. I mean, very holistic. Okay. Try to maintain this kind of quality, Raghu. Fine. See the 11th question. Describe various measures taken in India for disaster risk reduction, DRR, before and after signing the Sendai framework. So they are asking you the Sendai framework. What is this question? Yes, Sumant, that is a standard thing which many times we write, because disaster management, though it is under Home Ministry, there are many ministries which are coordinating disaster management. Maybe you can write that having a proper disaster management ministry is the way forward. It's a very good conclusion and solution. Describe various measures taken in India for disaster risk reduction before and after signing Sendai framework of 2015-30. How is this framework different from Hogyo framework? So we all know Hogyo framework was from 2005 to 2015. From 2015 to 30, it is Sendai framework. Try to give the comparison, and then in the context of Sendai framework, what are the different measures taken? You have to explain that. So just give the framework. Yeah. So for this particular question, we have to write the measures taken before signing the Sendai framework and after signing the Sendai framework, and then give a comparison between Hyogo framework and the Sendai framework. So very factual question. Okay. Factual question. You need to know what are the particular differences between two frameworks, and also what were the measures taken by India, okay, between these two frameworks. We all know, you can introduce by saying that whenever disasters are there, they impact the natural way of life. Just give me a second. So, firstly, we can introduce by saying that whenever disaster strikes, it's a very big loss to the human life and the property. And then many areas and people are vulnerable to the disasters, and hence the disaster risk reduction becomes significant. In this context, write the measures taken by India before signing the Sendai framework, that is around 2005 to 2015. We all know the famous National Disaster Management Authority or National Disaster Management Act of 2005 was framed well before the Sendai framework, after the tsunami hit India. So we can say the Ndma was formed, and under Ndma, the NDRF was formed, and India was one of the pioneer nations who had many plans in place for disaster risk reduction. And it also had foolproof plans for many disasters like earthquakes, tsunamis, cyclones, right from prevention, mitigation, risk reduction, okay, and the recovery. So we had national policy on disaster management, and also after the Sendai framework was signed, there were significant amendments to our disaster management plan, okay, and the main focus of Sendai framework, if you all see, it is on the PMRR, prevention, mitigation, response, and recovery. This is the main focus of the Sendai framework, which was signed in 2015 and it is up to 2030. So main focus was now on PMMRR, and significant amendments were done to National Disaster Management Plan with regard to these 4 issues pertaining to all the disasters. Okay. Now the measures taken are the focus is on the disaster preparedness, disaster risk reduction, understanding the vulnerability, mapping of the zones, and early warning, and creating the capabilities to fight the disaster within those areas. So these are the important parts of the measures after the Sendai framework. And then the focus is on empowering the local authorities to fight the disasters rather than macro approach. It is now micro approach. And also having proper early warning systems in place, informing people beforehand about the impending disasters, and then timely recovery and rehabilitation. These are the important measures post the Sendai framework. Now, differences between Hyogo framework and the Sendai framework. You can draw a tabular form or you can mention the differences between them. The first Hyogo protocol was mainly on the post-mortem basis, like what should we do after the disaster? But the Sendai framework is more proactive with regard to its PMRR approach, that is prevention, mitigation, response, and recovery. So Sendai framework is more proactive in approach when compared to the Hyogo framework. So Hyogo framework is mainly about the risk identification and other parts, while Sendai framework is before that, it is the prevention, mitigation, and so on. Okay. So Sendai framework not only talks about the immediate resolution of the issues, but also the long-term issues or the long-term planning of the areas vulnerable and prone to the disasters. Hence, Sendai framework is more holistic in approach, more complete in approach, and more futuristic in approach when compared to the Hyogo framework. And then you can say that, India being a very geographically diverse country and being at the fault line, of the Gondwana land, is prone to more diseases, and also it has boundary of ocean on the 3 sides. It's a subcontinent. It's basically prone to the disasters. Hence, the need of the hour is to much further implement the Sendai framework with proper integration of the technology and ensure that no life is lost during any kind of disaster, and implement the framework of disaster risk reduction in letter and spirit. Fine, 11th question clear?
Yes, sir.
Who has written the 11th? Who have not done yesterday or day before yesterday? Conclusion will be the same as I discussed, Arvind, just now. You can write a futuristic orientation. Okay, good points before disaster. After, yes, now focus on PMRR. Good differentiation between Hyogo framework and Sendai. Okay, you wrote in the tabular column format. Yes, it is more proactive and it is at the local, global, and regional levels. Conclusion, you can write the same as I told you, like, how the need of the hour is to fight the climate change or the impending disasters which are occurring in India, which is prone to many kinds of disaster, and hence we need to be proactive and have proper disaster risk reduction mechanisms and strategies. in line with the Sendai framework. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. See the last question. Drought has been recognized as a disaster in view of its spatial expanse, temporal duration, slow onset, and lasting effects on vulnerable sections. With a focus on September 2010 guidelines from Ndma authority, discuss the mechanisms for preparedness to deal with likely El Nino or La Nina fallouts in India. Very big question. Basically, it is asking you what are the impact of drought and how to handle the impact of drought. Okay. Give me the framework. Okay. So basically, the question looks very huge and so challenging, but it's a very simple question. It's asking you what are the reasons for drought, measures, and conclusion. That's all. Yes, Jitendra. Basically, what are the reasons for drought? Okay, you can write, and then in the reasons, then you have to say in the context of 2010 guidelines, you have to mention them. The 2010 drought guidelines, and those are the measures which have been incorporated, and the preparedness. Okay, the preparedness should be in line with the guidelines in the 2010. Okay, so in this question, in this kind of questions, except for the September 2010 guidelines, remaining the entire part of the answer is your answer. So whatever you want to innovate, whatever you want to give as a measure, you can always give, not at all an issue. Okay. So here, what you can write is drought is a prolonged spell where there is no rain and the agricultural output of that particular area is impacted. Okay. So those are the droughts. Then you can say it is because the droughts are such a phenomena, the duration of that particular long dry spell is very high and across a big area, and it is impacting many sections of the society. Hence, the impact of drought is also now categorized as disaster. Like how floods are disaster, now drought also is a disaster because it is also resulting in lot of loss of lives. So in that context, what are the 2010 guidelines given by the Ndma, that is the National Disaster Management Authority? They wanted to form special cells for targeting the drought prone districts and then categorizing the districts which are prone to the droughts within a particular state and giving them special focus. And the local administration and the civil administration should prepare a plan to fight the contingency of the drought. If there is drought, what are they going to do? So those kind of solution-oriented approach, they should be ready. Okay. And also, El Nino and La Nina. So that will be the last part. No? So we are still in the second part. We are talking about the guidelines with regard to the Ndma. Discuss the mechanisms for preparedness to deal with likely El Nino and La Nina. So that will be the next part. Okay. So the question is on 3 parts. So we'll write the preparedness for El Nino and La Nina in the last part. So those are the guidelines which are given by the 2010 Ndma Act. Okay. Then what is the preparedness? To discuss the mechanisms for preparedness to deal with likely El Nino or La Nina. So what will be the preparedness? First, what is El Nino? El Nino, because of El Nino, there is a prolonged drought-like situation in India. The rainfalls are hampered. The rainfall is very less in a year, which is impacted by the El Nino. You write that one line. that if there is a monsoon, the monsoon conditions are impacted, mainly the southwest monsoon conditions are impacted, and there is lesser rainfall when compared to the normal rainfall because of the impact of El Nino, and opposite or vice versa for La Nino. You can simply mention that and then start writing the measures required or the mechanisms required for having preparedness for El Nino, because El Nino is nothing but indirectly they are asking you what are the mechanisms to prepare for a drought. So what do you have preparedness for drought? Basically, when there is a drought, you will ensure that the farmers who are the primary sufferers of a drought, because the impact because of the lack of water supply, the crop production is impacted. You need to have proper insurance schemes like the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana or Raitu Bima in Telangana. So these are crop insurance programs which have to include the drought also into their insurance program. So farmers should not suffer revenue impact due to prolonged El Nino or La Nina. First point. After farmers, next is what the area will be impacted very significantly because of water shortage. Drought is significant water shortage. So proper water connectivity or water supply should be ensured to those areas which are impacted by the droughts. And next, you have to create public awareness as to how people have to be responsible in using the water during the droughts. Okay. And the food should be distributed among many people. Okay. Food has to be equally distributed via ration shops. Okay. So these are also called as PDS shops. From PDS, the ration supply has to be given to the impacted districts in a rational way. And then during droughts, there is also a possibility of people becoming anemic because of lack of food. So proper medication and nutrition should be ensured by supplying timely food to the people who are impacted by droughts. Okay. And the way forward would be to identify these drought prone areas. The solutions, the last part will be the solutions. Though the question is not directly asking you solutions, you will mention solutions. Solutions.
Sir, we missed that La Nina thing.
Okay, see, La Nina is basically opposite phenomena of El Nino. La Nina generally brings the floods, not the drought. So that's why I am avoiding here, because the entire question is about the drought. La Nina is an opposite phenomena to El Nino. It actually brings more water or more rainfall into the Indian subcontinent, and hence it can be having more impact on bringing the rainfall than the drought. Okay.
So can we mention about saving the water when the La Nina happens, so that we can use it for the El Nino?
Okay, you can write that. See, I'm just seeing here, it brings, El Nino brings less rainfall and La Nina brings more than normal rainfall. So obviously sometimes La Nina brings floods also. I don't know why they have integrated these two parts, but if you have to answer La Nina, maybe you can do as Rajni said, you can simply say La Nina times bring more rainfall to the Indian subcontinent than the El Nino. So the excess rainfall during La Nina can be stored in the reservoirs and can be diverted to the drought prone areas during the El Nino. So that is the preparedness. You can connect both the phenomena. Okay, Jitendra?
Yes, sir. Or else we
And
can write such a preparedness for La Nina also. It might be some.
see, preparedness for La
Yeah, sir,
Nina
yeah,
is
sir.
something, preparedness for floods. Preparedness floods already we have done. What will be the
Yes,
preparedness
sir.
for La Nina? La Nina means above normal rainfall. Above normal rainfall can be slightly normal rainfall, all floods. Do you understand?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes,
The
sir.
definition of La Nina is above the normal rainfall. If it is 100, 102 is also La Nina impact. So what is the preparedness for proper rainfall or slightly more than proper rainfall? If it is abnormal rainfall, it is floods. Did you understand?
Yes, sir.
So maybe preparation for La Nina can be, you can say La Nina is vice versa of El Nina, and it may give enough rainfall so that this excess water can be stored and used during the drought seasons. So I was telling you about the solutions. Yeah, solutions part of the drought impact is having proper storage mechanisms for water, using water in a very judicious way and not, being very careless about usage of water. Then asking farmers to grow crops which are not consuming lot of water. Okay, like cereals, not moving away from cereal crops and crops like sugarcane, and growing crops like millets, so that which can consume less water and still grow and give proper benefits to the farmers. Okay, and then you can say having proper awareness. Yes, developing water resistant crops or promoting dryland agriculture. Dryland agriculture is also one of the solutions for preparedness of drought, because droughts, wherever droughts occur frequently, those are dry lands. So dryland agriculture. And then you can write, we can involve institutes like CREDA, Central Research Institute for Dryland Agriculture. So bringing them into focus. So all these are the solutions, and then conclude MSP reorientation towards drought resistant crops. Yes, good suggestion. That's a good solution. See, that's what I said. Except for the 2010 guidelines, the entire question is your zone. So whatever innovative solutions you can write is definitely going to impact your marks. So MSP reorientation towards drought resistant steps, good. So that, if someone is growing millets, they'll also have MSP, not only cereal crops. Okay. And then finally conclude saying that, again, the vagaries of climate change are here to stay, and the frequency of El Nino and La Nina and its impact on Indian subcontinent is being felt very regularly. Hence, the need of the hour is to brace ourselves for severe conditions like drought and extreme conditions like floods. Hence, we need to have a proper disaster management focus and have our own solutions in place so that we can manage any disaster in a proper solution oriented way with the involvement of latest technologies. Okay, you've written, yeah, establishment, yeah, SDMs will be performing management of droughts. Good, the points are good. Guidelines. Okay. Okay. You have not answered one part of the question, that is mechanisms for preparedness to deal with El Nino and La Nina. So whatever we have discussed, those mechanisms you include in your answer. And then conclusion you have missed, Renuka. I don't know if you are in the class. So you have missed the conclusion part also. So try to incorporate both of them, then the answer will look much better. Okay.